The wind howled through the vast Wyoming plains, carrying with it the scent of snow and blood. Winter had come early that year, cruel and biting, and the land had already claimed what it could not spare. In the distance, a small log cabin stood nestled against the edge of a black pine forest, smoke curling from its crooked chimney. It was modest, leaning slightly from years of storms, but within its walls glowed the fierce warmth of survival. Inside, Mary Whitlock moved quietly, her skirts brushing against the floorboards as she stirred a thin stew hanging over the fire. Her hands were rough and cracked, her once delicate face lined with the grief of too many years passed too quickly. A widow of 4 years, she carried her burdens in silence, never once complaining to the 2 sets of young eyes that watched her with trust no hardship had managed to shake. Her eldest, Thomas, sat carving a piece of firewood into the shape of a horse, his brow furrowed in concentration. At 10, he already knew more about responsibility than most grown men. His little sister, Elsie, no older than 6, huddled beside the fire with a patched doll clutched tightly in her arms. They didn't know what a full belly felt like or the warmth of father's arms, but they knew their mother loved them. And in this place, love was the greatest currency. Mary glanced out the frost-laced window. It had been 3 days since they'd seen anyone ride the ridge. Even the trappers and male scouts had vanished into the storm. She was down to half a sack of flour, and the rabbit snares had come up empty that morning. Still, she didn't pray for relief. She prayed for the strength to last another week. It was then, just as twilight bled into the snow, that Thomas jumped his feet. "Mama, there's something moving." Mary reached for the rifle leaning against the door. She stepped outside, her boots crunching over the brittle crust of snow. The wind cut through her shawl, but she stood firm, eyes narrowing. At first, there was nothing, just a gust stirring the brush. Then came the sound. Hooves. Slow. Labored. A dark horse stumbled into view, its sides heaving, its rider barely upright. Mary rushed forward, heart thudding in her chest. The man on the saddle was slumped, half frozen. Blood soaked his left side, black against his tattered coat. He was older, though hard to tell how much. His beard caked in frost, hat lost to the wind. As he collapsed forward, Mary caught his weight, staggering beneath him. "Thomas, help me." Together, they dragged the stranger into the cabin. Mary laid him near the fire, peeling away his soaked gloves and cutting through the leather coat with trembling fingers. The wound was a bullet hole, clean but deep, just above the rib cage. She worked quickly, using the last of the boiled rags and whiskey she'd hidden for emergencies. Her hands moved with a clarity born of desperation. This wasn't the first wounded man she'd tended to, or had taught her more than she ever wanted to know. As the stranger slipped into unconsciousness, he murmured something barely audible. "Ledger, Barton, they're coming." Mary paused, brushing hair from his brow. He was burning up. "You're safe now," she whispered, though her voice trembled with uncertainty. That night, she kept vigil. The fire crackled low, casting shadows on the walls. Outside, the storm deepened, but within, there was only silence and the shallow rise and fall of the stranger's chest. She should have been afraid. A wounded man, armed, unknown, but fear had long ago given way to something else. Weariness, perhaps, or maybe hope, were in the face of caution. By dawn, the man stirred. His eyes blinked open, storm gray and sharp despite the fever. He tried to sit, groaning through clenched teeth. "Lie still," Mary said, easing him back. "You'll rip the stitches." "Where am I?" "My home. You rode in half dead last night." He looked around, confused, then met her eyes. "Name's Colt McAllister." Mary said nothing. The name tickled something at the edge of her memory, but she let it pass. "I'm Mary Whitlock. These are my children, Thomas and Elsie." Colt's gaze softened as he looked toward the kids. Elsie offered a hesitant smile from beneath her blanket. "Why'd you help me?" he asked. Mary's voice was steady. "Because you needed help." A beat passed. Then he nodded, and something in his face, a hardness that had been there, melted just a little. For the next 2 days, the snow fell heavy, trapping them in. Mary fed Colt broth and changed his bandages. He watched her quietly, never speaking much, but his eyes missed nothing. He saw how thin she'd grown, how her hands trembled after every task, how the boy stepped in like a man, tending the fire and feeding the chickens. "You've done all this alone?" he asked one evening, when the wind had calmed. "I had no choice." "What about neighbors?" "The closest ranch is 12 miles. Mr. Avery, but he lost his wife last spring. Ain't spoken much since. And I don't trust the rest. Not with a daughter under my roof." He didn't press further. But that night, Colt dreamed, fevered dreams of gunfire, of papers burning, of a man with a scar down his neck snarling promises of revenge. He woke with a jolt, sweating, breathing hard. Mary was there, with a damp cloth. "Bad dreams?" she asked softly. He nodded. "You're safe here," she said again. But Colt wasn't sure he ever had been safe. Not since that day he signed over half his land to a mining syndicate and found out too late they'd tricked him. He wasn't just wounded. He was hunted. And now he dragged this woman and her children into something they couldn't see coming. Still, he said nothing. By the fourth day, Colt could sit up. He spoke more now, though still guarded. He told Thomas stories of wild mustangs and cattle drives, and Elsie laughed when he mimicked a mule's bray. Mary watched, her heart torn. It was the first time she'd seen her children smile in weeks. One afternoon, as she hung laundry behind the house, she heard footsteps crunch behind her. She turned. Colt stood there, leaning on a cane Thomas had carved for him. "You shouldn't be walking yet," she said. "I couldn't stay inside. Not with a sky like that." He nodded to the horizon. It was pink with dusk, the snow glittering like crushed pearls. They stood in silence for a moment. "You said your name's Colt McAllister." Mary said slowly. "There was a McAllister ranch up north. Rich land. Cattle as far as the eye could see." He nodded. "Used to be mine. Until I trusted the wrong man." "Is that why someone shot you?" He didn't answer. Instead, he said, "They'll come for me. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But they'll come." Mary's breath caught. "I can't stay," he added. "Not if it puts you at risk." But Mary shook her head. "You stay until you can ride. I won't turn away a man who's done no wrong. Not in my eyes." Their eyes met. Something passed between them. Unspoken. It wasn't romance. It was something harder, deeper. Two people weathered by life, each carrying scars the other could see clearly now. Inside the house, Elsie's laughter echoed through the log walls. The fire glowed warm. But outside, the wind had shifted again. Far off, beyond the trees, a figure on horseback stopped on the ridge, watching, waiting, and the storm hadn't even begun. By the time the snow stopped falling, the land was blanketed in a silence so pure it felt sacred. Days had passed, and Colt McAllister's wound had begun to heal, though he still walked with a limp and grit his teeth whenever he shifted wrong. He hadn't spoken much of what had happened before the cabin, at least not to Mary, but Thomas had taken a keen liking to him, asking questions with curiosity that only a fatherless boy could possess. Colt answered with just enough truth to satisfy him, and just enough mystery to keep him guessing. Mary noticed how easily he folded into their rhythm. He chopped kindling when his side allowed it, taught Elsie how to braid rope from old feed sacks, and even managed to fix the back hinge on the creaking door without being asked. He never overstepped, never intruded, but something in him had begun to tether itself to their lives. One morning, Mary found him sitting on the porch, rifle across his knees, eyes narrowed toward the trees. "Something wrong?" she asked. He didn't look at her. There were tracks this morning, fresh ones. A man on foot circled the house and disappeared into the brush. Her stomach tightened. Could have been a hunter. Colt shook his head. No animal signs. No kill. Just watching. Mary gripped the edge of the railing. "Is it them?" Could be. She didn't need to ask who them was anymore. He still hadn't said their names, but the fear in his voice told her everything. "I'll take the rifle next watch," she said firmly. Colt turned, surprise flickering in his eyes. "I wasn't always a widow in a dress, Colt," she said. "I grew up on the trail, learned to shoot before I learned to sew." A slow smile tugged at his lips. Remind me not to argue with you. That afternoon, he finally told her the truth. They sat at the table, a pot of weak coffee between them, while Thomas and Elsie played outside with a ball made of stitched cloth and dried beans. I owned the McAllister Ranch, inherited from my father. We were doing fine until the copper men came through. Said they wanted a slice of the hills. Just a small piece, they claimed, to dig without disturbing the cattle. Mary listened without interruption, her hands curled around the tin cup. I should have said no, but they were slick, offered more money than I'd seen in my life. So I signed. 2 weeks later, they pushed through a land grab, built fences across the valley, and laid claim to everything. I sued, won the first time, lost the appeal. Then they sent a man, said I could sell what was left for pennies, or lose it all the hard way. Mary's eyes hardened. You didn't sell. Colt shook his head. Didn't get the chance. One night, someone set the barn on fire. I ran in to save the horses. Took a bullet in the ribs instead. He leaned back slowly, wincing. Woke up on the trail, bleeding. Barely got to your ridge before the snow hit. Mary exhaled long and low. So you're not just running, you're a marked man. Seems that way. She stared at the floor. It would have been easy to send him away right then, to protect her children, to return to the silence she knew. But something in her heart rebelled. Maybe it was the way Elsie called him Mr. Colt, like he was already part of the family. Or maybe it was the way he looked at Thomas, correcting his grip on a tool, without condescension, just quiet guidance. He stays, she told herself. And it wasn't a decision. It was a truth. That night, as the wind picked up again, Colt stood by the window long after the children were asleep. His body ached, but something deeper gnawed at him, guilt. These people had saved his life, and if the men following him ever came, it wouldn't just be his blood spilled. He considered slipping out, saddle what was left of his strength, and vanish before dawn. But when he looked down at the sleeping forms curled under patched quilts, he couldn't do it. Instead, he sat at the table, sharpening his knife by lamplight. The next day, the first signs of danger arrived. Mary was tending to the coop when she heard it, a loud crack like a branch breaking, but too sharp, too deliberate. She froze, instinct honed by years of widowhood. Then she saw Thomas running from the tree line, breathless. "Mama," he gasped, "there's a man near the creek, just standing there, watching." Colt was out the door before she could answer, rifle in hand, eyes scanning the horizon. He didn't see anyone, but the message was clear. Whoever had found him wanted him to know it. That night, he helped Mary barricade the windows with timber and furniture. They stacked sandbags near the front door, a relic from the war years Mary had kept tucked away for emergencies. "You sure you want to go through with this?" he asked her quietly. She handed him a lantern. "They come here, they're not just fighting you. They're coming for my children. I won't run from that." The moment stretched long between them, filled with unspoken fear and a flicker of respect. "You remind me of someone," Colt said softly. "Who?" "My mother." She was hard as flint, love like a storm, but she'd break a man's nose if he raised his voice to a child. Mary chuckled, just a breath of sound, but it lit something warm between them. Then, just before dawn, the first shot rang out. Colt dove to the floor, pulling Elsie down with him as Mary shoved Thomas behind the hearth. Another shot cracked through the shutters, splinters flying. Mary crawled to the side window, cracked it open with the barrel of her rifle, and scanned the trees. 3 of them, she muttered. 1 to the east, 2 to the ridge. Colt winced as he got to his knees. "They're trying to flush us out." Classic pincer movement. Mary eyed him. "You think like them. I used to be one of them." Another bullet thunked into the side wall. "We need to split their line," Colt whispered. "If we wait, they'll corner us in here like rats." Mary nodded. "You go west. I'll cover the ridge. Thomas, stay low. Protect your sister, no matter what." The boy didn't argue. Colt moved out the back, snow crunching under his boots. His ribs screamed with every step, but he pushed through. He flanked the side of the barn, rifle raised. Ahead, a shadow moved, tall, rifle in hand. Colt aimed, held his breath, and squeezed the trigger. The man fell. A shout erupted from the ridge. Colt dropped to his belly just as another shot grazed the bark above his head. He rolled, reloaded, and fired again. Silence. Then footsteps running. Inside the cabin, Mary returned fire, forcing the remaining man to retreat into the woods. The gunfire stopped as suddenly as it had begun. For a long time, there was nothing but the wind. When Colt returned, limping and bloodied, Mary met him at the door. 2 down. 1 fled, he said. She nodded. We'll bury them come morning. They didn't speak of the danger again that night. They didn't need to. Instead, as the fire burned low and the children slept soundly once more, Mary sat beside Colt on the porch. The stars were out now, piercing the velvet dark. You should have left, she said quietly. I couldn't. She looked at him then, truly looked, and saw not the wounded man who stumbled into her life, but someone who might stay, not because he owed her, but because he needed something too. Somewhere deep inside her, something long dormant stirred. And far off, across the valley, a second fire glowed. Small, flickering. Another was watching, and the story was far from over. The days that followed passed in uneasy quiet. The snow melted slowly, revealing patches of sodden ground and broken brush. Evidence of the fight that had nearly cost them everything. Colt kept to the tree lean. Scouting at dawn and dusk, his limp more pronounced but his resolve unshaken. Mary, meanwhile, kept the children close and the cabin tighter. They took meals in shifts, spoke in hushed tones, and flinched at the sound of snapping branches. It was survival again, not just of body, but of mind. Yet something had changed between them. Mary no longer regarded Colt as a stranger. There was a bond now, unspoken but undeniable, forged not in words but in shared danger and sacrifice. He'd risked his life for her children. That counted for something no court or priest could measure. One evening, she watched him from the kitchen window as he returned from the ridge. His shoulders hunched, his coat stained with pine sap and melted snow. He looked less like a man fleeing and more like a man searching, though for what, she couldn't yet name. He entered without knocking, and their eyes met across the quiet room. Tracks again, he said. 1 man, maybe 2, watching from distance. They didn't get close, but they're looking. Mary set the pot of beans on the table. We can't live like this. I know. Then what do we do? Colt hesitated, then stepped forward. We take the fight to them. Mary blinked. You mean ride out? Hunt them down? No, he said, his voice low. We find the man behind this, the one who sent them, end this at the root. She frowned, her instincts bristling. You're talking about going back into town. That's suicide. Maybe, he said. But if I don't, they'll keep sending men. They'll wear us down, coming stronger next time. And what happens when they catch us unaware? She looked away, jaw clenched. He softened his tone. You don't have to come. I wouldn't ask it. But I need to go. I need to end this. Mary turned back to him. And leave us here? Alone. I'd never leave you unprotected, he said, almost too quickly. There's a marshal I trust, 2 towns over in Dry Hill. He's honest, might not take a bribe like the others. I ride to him, show him the deeds, the threats, the burns. They'll have to act. Maybe not with guns, but with law. She shook her head slowly. The law doesn't scare men like that, Colt. It barely slows them down. I have to try, he said. If not for me, for your children. She didn't argue further. She just nodded slowly, and in that gesture was something deeper. Permission, yes, but also faith. That night, while the children slept, Mary helped Colt pack. She stitched a torn corner of his coat, slid jerky into his satchel, and handed him the last of the dried apples. Neither of them spoke much, but when their hands brushed in passing, the silence felt electric. At dawn, he kissed Elsie's forehead and clasped Thomas by the shoulder. Keep her safe, little man. I will, Thomas said solemnly. Then Colt turned to Mary. Her arms were crossed, not in defiance, but in resistance to something more tender. He didn't ask for a goodbye. He just looked at her, his eyes saying everything his mouth couldn't. And then he rode off into the gray morning mist. For days, the cabin fell heavier. Mary kept herself busy, chopping wood, mending clothes, guiding the children through their routines. But at night, she stared out at the trail Colt had vanished down, praying the next man to ride and wouldn't be carrying bad news. On the fourth morning, she found a note pinned to the door with a blade she didn't recognize. He rides with ghosts. Turn him in or be buried beside him. The handwriting was jagged, rushed, but the message was unmistakable. She burned it in the stove before the children could see. From then on, she slept with a rifle by her bed. 2 days later, a horse appeared on the ridge at dusk. Not Colt's. This one was black, lean, its rider slumped but upright. Mary stood on the porch, rifle in hand, heart in her throat. As the figure approached, she saw a badge glinting in the low light. Name's Marshal Tiernan. The man called. Colt McAllister sent me. Mary exhaled. She didn't lower the gun. Where is he? In holding, Tiernan said. Safe for now. He came to me with his story. The deeds, the threats. Took a hell of a risk. Got ambushed on the way back to town. Took out 2 of them. Rode injured to my office. Mary's stomach twisted. He's hurt. Cracked ribs. Bullet grazed his leg. But he's alive. And he made sure I saw everything before he passed out. Mary stepped forward. Why are you here? Colt said if anything happened to him, I was to ride here, make sure you and the children were safe, and let you decide. Decide what? If you want to run or stand. Mary didn't hesitate. We stand. Tiernan gave a small nod, respect clear in his expression. Then I'll need your help. There's a hearing in 2 days in Dry Hill. If you testify, if the court sees your injuries, here's your account. It could tip things. I have 2 children. And a rifle, he said, smiling slightly. Colt said you were a better shot than him. She smiled too, despite herself. That night, Mary packed a satchel. She kissed her children goodbye, leaving them in the care of the neighbor down the creek, a grizzled widow with eyes like hawks and hands that once broke mustangs. Then she mounted Tiernan's spare horse and rode with him under cover of night. The ride to Dry Hill took a day and a half. Along the way, Tiernan explained what Colt had uncovered, a web of corruption connecting land surveyors, hired guns, and crooked judges. McAllister's fight had stirred the hornet's nest. Now, it was time to finish what he started. They arrived at the courthouse just before noon. Colt was there, pale but standing, bandaged and resolute. When he saw Mary dismount, his face cracked into the first smile she'd seen in days. I knew you'd come, he said. She walked straight to him, took his hand, and didn't let go. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Men in suits flanked the benches, their expressions sharp, calculating. But Mary wasn't afraid. She stepped forward, voice steady, recounting every moment. From the night Colt arrived on her porch, to the gunman in the snow, to the note nailed to her door. By the time she finished, the room was silent. The judge, an older man with sunken eyes but a good heart, banged the gavel. This court believes there is cause for an investigation. McAllister will retain his land pending inquiry, and those implicated will be held under scrutiny until facts are confirmed. It wasn't justice. Not yet, but it was a start. Afterward, Colt and Mary stepped into the sunlit street. She looked at him, the lines of pain still etched into his face, and saw more than just a man who had survived. She saw a man who had fought for her future. He reached for her hand. You were the strongest one all along. No, she said softly. We both were. And somewhere, far off across the mountains, spring was beginning to stir. The return of the homestead came under skies streaked with pink and gold, the final chill of winter receding into thawed earth and soft breezes. Mary rode beside Colt, her body aching from the courtroom days and nights on hard betting, but her spirit buoyant with something she hadn't felt in months, relief. Behind them, Dry Hill still echoed with whispers of corruption exposed and justice pursued. Ahead lay the cabin, the children, and a future not yet certain but no longer hanging by a thread. Colt's injuries slowed them some. He rode stiffly, ribs wrapped tight beneath his coat, the stitch wound on his leg weeping now and then through the fabric. Mary noticed, but he never complained. When she offered to stop, he always replied with a quiet, just a little farther. They crested the ridge as morning broke fully, mist rising off the creek that wound through the valley like a silver ribbon. There, nestled in its pocket of pines and wind-worn stone, stood the cabin. Smoke curled from the chimney. Children's laughter floated faintly through the air, and Mary's heart surged. Colt reined in, gaze fixed ahead. I wasn't sure I'd ever see it again. Mary turned to him. You made sure we still had it to see. They dismounted together. As they neared the porch, the door burst open and Thomas came bounding out, followed by Elsie with her hair undone and cheeks flushed. Both children collided into Colt's legs, hugging him tightly, oblivious to his wounds. He winced, chuckled, and dropped to one knee, holding them close. I told you I'd come back, he murmured. Mary stepped onto the porch last, watching the reunion with eyes glassy and full. She had fought alone for so long. She'd almost forgotten what it felt like to share the burden. But now it was different. The weight had shifted. It was theirs now, shared, supported, and somehow lighter because of it. Inside, the house was warm, the stew pot bubbling on the fire, and the walls bearing signs of life. Drawings tacked up crookedly, boots scattered near the hearth, and a table set for four. Colt sank into a chair, breath shallow, exhaustion creeping in like shadows at dusk. Mary poured water and knelt beside him. You need rest. He caught her wrist gently. We both do. She nodded, and for the first time in weeks, sleep came to them without fear curling beneath it. The next few days passed in quiet labor. There were fences to mend, tools to repair, and supplies to restock. Though his injuries limited him, Colt did what he could, splitting kindling with one arm, teaching Thomas how to saddle a horse, showing Elsie how to whistle through her teeth. Mary watched him from the kitchen window sometimes, catching glimpses of a man returning to himself. One evening, as they walked a field where winter wheat would soon grow, Mary broke the silence. You know they're not gone, she said. The men behind it all, the ones with money, they'll find a new way. Colt nodded. They always do. Then what now? He paused, brushing a thumb over the stalks. We don't give them reason. We file the land right. We work it honest. And if they come again, we're not alone anymore. She turned toward him. I never asked, why did you come here, Colt? That first night, when you were bleeding and running. Why this place? His eyes lingered on hers, searching for the words. I had a map, a deed, some claim papers. All of it worthless unless I found the right land. But more than that, I think I was drawn here, like I'd been circling this place my whole life and didn't know it. She studied him. You don't believe in fate. No, he said quietly, but I believe in second chances. Mary didn't answer. Instead, she slipped her hand into his and held it there, letting silence do what words could not. Later that night, Colt woke to creaking outside. He rose quietly, rifle in hand, pain stabbing down his side. Mary stirred in the next room but said nothing, trusting his instinct. He moved to the window and peered into the dark. A figure was there, near the barn, small, bent, holding something. He stepped out onto the porch. That's close enough. The figure froze. Then a voice called back, Old, Reedy. Ain't here to steal nothing. Just return what's owed. Colt stepped down, boots crunching on frost. As he neared, he saw the old man's face, weathered, pockmarked, one-eye milky. He held a satchel, bulging with papers. These belong to you, the man said. Ledgers, names, maps, everything the men did. I kept records for them. Didn't know what they was really doing. When I found out, I ran. Hid out in the canyon. Heard what you did at the hearing. Figured it was time. Colt took the satchel, stunned. Why give it to me? Because you'll do something with it. That marshal, he's brave, but he don't know the land like you do. You know where the rock grows. Colt stared at the satchel. This could shut them down. The old man nodded. If you live long enough to use it. Then he turned and vanished into the trees like a ghost. Colt returned to the house. Satchel clutched in his arms. Mary was waiting by the door, eyes questioning. He didn't speak, just handed her the bundle. Together, they sat by the fire, poring over every page. By dawn, they had a plan. Over the next few weeks, letters were written, documents copied and sent to Tiernan, names flagged, trails traced, and slowly, methodically, the web began to unravel. Some arrests came quiet, others loud. A bank folded under scrutiny. A judge resigned. The town's largest land company shuttered overnight. Through it all, Mary stood beside Colt. They met with farmers, surveyed parcels, taught others how to file their claims correctly. Word spread of the widow and the fugitive who became folk legends. Not because they fought the system with fists, but because they learned how to beat it with truth. Spring melted fully into summer. The valley bloomed. The crops took root. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the world turned gold, Colt and Mary sat on the porch with their arms brushing, not speaking, not needing to. Thomas chased fireflies in the tall grass, while Elsie hummed lullabies she barely remembered from her earliest days. Mary turned to Colt. "Are we safe now?" He didn't answer right away. Then, "Safer than we've ever been." She leaned into his shoulder. "You ever think about leaving? About starting somewhere else?" He shook his head. "Not anymore. Everything I need is right here." The light dimmed. The stars came out one by one. And in that moment, beneath the vast sky and beside the woman who'd once aimed a shotgun at him, Colt McAllister finally felt something he hadn't in years. Home.